You know Petra. Everyone knows Petra, the rose-red city carved into Jordanian cliffs, the treasury facade glowing at sunset, the sick corridor narrowing like a stone throat. Tourists by the thousands walk those ancient paths every year, cameras ready, guidebooks memorized. But here's what they don't tell you in the brochures: less than 15% of Petra has been excavated. The rest, the vast majority of this UNESCO World Heritage Site, still sleeps beneath centuries of sand and stone, holding secrets that make archaeologists lose sleep and rewrite their textbooks in the middle of the night. In 2003, a Bedouin shepherd chasing a lost goat stumbled into a previously unmapped tomb complex 3 kilometers south of the main tourist route. What they found inside wasn't just another burial chamber. It was something that challenged every assumption we've made about Napataean society, their trade networks, and possibly their contact with civilizations we never imagined they'd encountered. We're going to spend the next hour together diving deep into archaeological mysteries that refuse to behave, sites that don't fit the narrative, discoveries that make experts argue in academic journals for decades without reaching consensus. This isn't about aliens or pseudoscience. This is about real dirt under real fingernails, carbon-dated artifacts that shouldn't exist where they were found, and inscriptions in languages nobody can fully translate. You're going to hear about tombs that contain skeletons far larger than anatomically possible, trade goods that traveled impossible distances, and architectural techniques that seem to have vanished without a trace. Some of these mysteries have been studied for over a century. Others were unearthed last decade. All of them share one thing in common: they refuse to give up their final secrets, no matter how many ground-penetrating radar surveys we run or how many spectrographic analyses we perform on pottery shards. We'll examine sites across continents and millennia, from the windswept plateaus of South America to the densely forested river valleys of Southeast Asia. Each location tells a story that begins with confidence. We know this culture did this for these reasons, and ends with a question mark that grows larger the more we dig. You'll learn about the Petra tomb discovery, yes, but also about half a dozen other sites that deserve equal attention, places where the physical evidence points in one direction, while every textbook insists on another. By the end of this journey, you might find yourself looking differently at the ancient world, realizing that our ancestors were far stranger, far more connected, and far more capable than we ever gave them credit for. So settle in, because we're about to explore the borderlands where archaeology meets genuine mystery, where peer-reviewed research collides with inexplicable facts, and where every answer we find generates 3 new questions we never thought to ask. The tomb that Shepard found in 2003 wasn't marked on any map, colonial or modern. The entrance had been sealed with a combination of cut limestone blocks and natural rockfall, creating a barrier that had kept looters out for approximately 1800 years, based on preliminary stratigraphy studies. When the Jordanian Department of Antiquities finally organized a proper excavation in 2005, they entered a chamber measuring 43 meters in length, carved directly into the salmon-colored sandstone that makes Petra famous. The ceiling rose 7 meters overhead, still bearing traces of painted geometric patterns and mineral pigments, ochre, malachite green, and a brilliant blue derived from lapis lazuli that must have been imported from Afghanistan, over 3,000 kilometers away. But the painted ceiling wasn't what stopped the excavation team in their tracks. It was the sarcophagi. 17 of them, arranged in 2 parallel rows, each carved from single blocks of black basalt that doesn't occur naturally anywhere in the southern Levant. The nearest known basalt deposits are in northern Syria, roughly 500 kilometers distant. Transporting these massive coffins, each weighing between 2 and 3 metric tons, would have required enormous logistical coordination, specialized equipment, and probably months of careful hauling across desert terrain. Inside the sarcophagi, the team found remains that immediately sparked controversy. Conventional Nabatean burials from the 1st century CE typically feature individuals between 160 and 170 centimeters tall, consistent with nutritional and genetic profiles across the ancient Near East. But the 17 individuals in this tomb measured substantially larger. The tallest skeleton, catalogued as Burial 7, extended 218 centimeters from crown to heel, with robust bone density and muscle attachment points suggesting tremendous physical strength. 3 others exceeded 200 centimeters. Orthodox explanations centered on acromegaly or other growth disorders. But here's where it gets peculiar. The bones showed none of the characteristic deformities associated with gigantism. No thickened skull plates, no enlarged jaw structures, no joint abnormalities. These were proportionally normal humans, just substantially larger than the population baseline. Radiocarbon dating of collagen samples from burials 7 return dates clustering around 140 c, plus or minus 30 years, placing them squarely in the late Nabatean period, shortly before Roman annexation transformed the region. The grave goods deepened the mystery rather than clarifying it. Among the 17 burials, archaeologists recovered ceramic vessels and styles associated with 3 distinct cultures: traditional Nabatean painted ware, Roman terra sigillata from Eastern Mediterranean workshops, and most puzzling, 11 ceramic fragments bearing decorative motifs identical to Kushan Empire pottery from the Indus Valley region. That last category shouldn't exist in Petra. The Kushan Empire, flourishing from roughly 30 to 375 C in what is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, and northern India, maintained trade relationships with Rome through Indian Ocean maritime routes. But direct material evidence of Kushan goods in Nabatean contexts is virtually non-existent in the archaeological record. Some researchers suggested the pottery reached Petra through multi-stage trading, passed hand-to-hand across Central Asian oases and Arabian caravan routes. Others pointed to the iconography on the fragments, stylized representations of what appeared to be Buddhist stupas and Gandharan artistic conventions, and wondered whether these weren't trade goods at all, but personal possessions of travelers who had journeyed from the subcontinent to this remote Jordanian canyon. Then there were the inscriptions. Nabatean Aramaic script covered the interior walls, standard funerary formulas wishing the deceased safe passage to the afterlife. But intermixed with the Aramaic, archaeologists identified 17 short inscriptions in a script nobody could definitively classify. The characters showed superficial similarities to Brahmi, the script used across ancient India, but with structural differences that made direct translation impossible. Over the next decade, linguists proposed theories ranging from a corrupted Brahmi variant to an entirely unknown writing system developed in isolation. One controversial 2011 paper suggested the script might represent a pidgin language created by merchants operating along previously undocumented trade routes connecting the Indian Ocean with the Red Sea and Mediterranean. If true, this would indicate a level of transcontinental economic integration far earlier and more sophisticated than standard historical models allow for. Critics pointed out that 17 inscriptions constitute insufficient data for linguistic analysis, that the similarities to Brahmi might be coincidental, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, something conspicuously absent. Now, let's be fair to the orthodox interpretation. The Nabateans were magnificent traders, controlling the incense route that funneled frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia to Mediterranean markets. They maintained diplomatic and commercial relationships with multiple empires simultaneously. The presence of exotic goods in an elite tomb isn't inexplicable. It's exactly what you'd expect from wealthy merchants who could afford luxury imports. The unusual skeletal heights could represent a family lineage with hereditary growth advantages, carefully preserved through endogamous marriage patterns. The undeciphered script might be decorative rather than linguistic, visual flourishes that mimic writing without actually constituting readable text. These are reasonable, parsimonious explanations that don't require rewriting the historical record. But they don't quite explain the totality of the evidence. They don't explain why this particular tomb was so carefully hidden, sealed off from the main necropolis areas. They don't explain the uniformity of the large skeletal heights across multiple individuals, or why those individuals received such elaborate burial treatment. They don't explain why someone would go to the trouble of transporting 17 3-ton basalt sarcophagi across 500 kilometers of desert unless the deceased possessed extraordinary significance. Picture yourself standing in that tomb, your headlamp cutting through millennia of darkness, illuminating painted patterns that still glow with mineral brightness. You run your hand along the wall, fingers tracing inscriptions that no living person can read, wondering what urgent message someone felt compelled to preserve in stone. Around you stand the basalt coffins, dark and imposing, each one a monument to engineering and devotion. Who were these 17 people? Why did their deaths merit such expense? Were they warriors from distant lands, merchants who pioneered new routes, priests carrying foreign mysteries? The tomb offers no clear answers, only the physical facts: exceptional height, mixed cultural artifacts, unknown script, deliberate concealment. We've mapped their bones, analyzed their burial context, debated their significance in dozens of journal articles. We still don't know who they really were or why their story ended here, in a hidden chamber beneath the Petra cliffs, waiting 18 centuries for a wandering goat to reveal their existence. 7,000 kilometers east of Petra, where the Mekong River winds through the mountainous border region between Laos and Thailand, archaeologists working in 2008 stumbled across something that shouldn't exist according to conventional timelines of human development in Southeast Asia. The site, now designated Ban Cheng Complex Extension Site 12, occupies a low plateau overlooking the river valley, positioned perfectly to monitor both water traffic and overland trails through the forest. Initial excavations uncovered a layer of habitation debris radiocarbon dated to approximately 1600 BC, placing it squarely in the regional Bronze Age. That alone wasn't remarkable. Ban Cheng culture is famous for sophisticated bronze metallurgy and distinctive red-on-buff pottery. What caught everyone's attention was the metallurgical evidence from layer 7, 60 centimeters below the surface. Mixed in with bronze artifacts, spearheads, bangles, ritual vessels, the team found 17 fragments of worked iron, each piece showing clear signs of deliberate smelting and forging rather than simple cold working of meteoric iron. Iron smelting requires temperatures around 1,500 degrees Celsius and sophisticated bellows technology to maintain reducing atmospheres in the furnace. Standard archaeological models place the beginning of iron technology in Southeast Asia around 500 BC, a full millennium after the Ban Cheng fragments were deposited. The dates have been verified by 3 independent laboratories using different carbon samples from the same context layer. Unless the stratigraphy is somehow corrupted, an extensive soil chemistry analysis suggests it isn't, these iron fragments represent technology appearing 1,000 years too early. The pieces themselves show sophisticated alloying techniques, with carbon content ranging between 0.6 and 0.9%, putting them in the medium carbon steel range suitable for edge tools and weapons. Someone in this river valley during the 2nd millennium BC understood not just how to smelt iron, but how to deliberately add carbon to create steel, a metallurgical refinement that elsewhere took centuries of experimentation to perfect. But the metal wasn't the only anomaly. Excavations of Structure 3, a post-hole pattern indicating a substantial wooden building, revealed beneath the floor a ritual cache containing 73 human teeth, none of them matching the skeletal remains found elsewhere in the site. Dental analysis indicated the teeth came from at least 47 different individuals, with wear patterns and isotopic signatures suggesting diverse geographic origins. Some showed enamel characteristics consistent with highland diets rich in millet, others with lowland rice consumption, still others with marine protein sources. This wasn't a local cemetery. This was a collection of trophies or relics gathered from across a vast geographic range, deliberately buried together in a single ritual deposit. Accompanying the teeth were 11 jade beads carved in styles associated with Neolithic Chinese cultures from the Yellow River Valley, over 3,000 kilometers north. Jade doesn't occur naturally anywhere in mainland Southeast Asia. These beads must have traveled through multiple hands and across multiple generations to reach this Mekong Valley site. The cultural implications are staggering. If the dates hold, and so far they have, then we're looking at a Bronze Age society that maintained trade networks spanning most of Eastern Asia, that possessed metallurgical knowledge centuries ahead of their neighbors, and that practiced ritual behaviors involving systematic collection of human remains from distant populations. Some researchers suggest the site served as a ritual center, a pilgrimage destination where representatives from multiple ethnic groups gathered for ceremonies we can no longer reconstruct. The teeth might represent offerings, symbolic connections between the site and far-flung communities. Others propose a more martial interpretation. This was a warrior society that took trophies from conquered enemies, preserving teeth as proof of victories in battles that ranged across continental distances. The iron technology, in this reading, gave them military superiority that enabled expansion and domination. Then there's the mythology preserved in oral traditions among the Lautai ethnic groups who currently inhabit the region. Several village elder councils tell stories about the Sky Iron people, giants who fell from the heavens in ages past, bringing metalworking secrets and strange knowledge. These stories describe the Sky Iron people as standing head and shoulders above normal humans, with skin that gleamed like polished bronze and voices that boomed like thunder. Before dismissing this as pure folklore, consider that the Banchang Site 12 excavations also uncovered skeletal remains from 3 individuals whose femur lengths indicate standing heights between 193 and 201 centimeters, exceptionally tall for populations in this region and time period, where average heights typically range between 155 and 165 centimeters. Were these the giants, remembered in myth? Did their unusual stature, combined with mastery of iron technology, transform them into legendary figures whose stories survived 40 centuries of oral transmission? Still, for all the evidence, we can't explain the central paradox. Where did the iron technology come from? The nearest known iron smelting sites from this period are in Anatolia and the Caucasus, over 7,000 kilometers distant. There's no archaeological evidence of systematic technology transfer across that vast distance during the Bronze Age. Some researchers propose independent invention. Perhaps a particularly innovative metalworker in the Mekong Valley discovered iron smelting through experimentation with local copper iron ore deposits. But independent invention doesn't explain the sophistication of the carbon alloying, which elsewhere took generations of refinement. Others suggest that a small group of knowledgeable migrants arrived from the West, bringing technology with them, establishing themselves in this strategic location, and gradually integrating with local populations. The teeth collection might represent marriage alliances or tributary relationships with dozens of surrounding communities, a network of connections that explains both the trade goods and the population diversity evident in the dental remains. Imagine walking through the site at dawn, mist rising from the Mekong below, the forest alive with bird calls and insect hums. You're standing where someone stood 40 centuries ago, perhaps a metalworker tending a furnace, coaxing iron from ore through techniques they alone understood. Around them, the community goes about its day, farmers tending rice paddies, traders examining jade beads, warriors maintaining bronze-tipped spears. In a ritual building, teeth from distant relatives and conquered enemies rest in darkness, each one a story, a connection, a proof of relationships that stretched across thousands of kilometers. We've found their tools, mapped their structures, analyzed their bones. We've proven they possessed technology they shouldn't have had, maintained networks we can barely trace, practiced rituals we can't fully interpret. We still don't know how they acquired that knowledge, why they preserved those teeth, or what ultimately happened to their ironworking traditions, which apparently vanished without spreading to neighboring groups who continued using bronze for another 1,000 years. The wind never stops on the Altiplano, that high plateau stretching across western Bolivia where the air sits thin at 4,000 meters elevation and the sun burns with ultraviolet intensity. Here, roughly 60 kilometers south of Lake Titicaca, lies a place called Concohuacan, a site that flourished between 200 BC and 400 CE during what archaeologists call the late formative period. The ruins don't look like much at first glance. Low stone foundations, scattered carved blocks, depressions marking ancient plazas. But between 2004 and 2012, systematic excavations revealed something that fundamentally challenged our understanding of Andean civilization during this supposedly transitional period. The researchers uncovered a massive sunken temple complex, with central plaza measuring 70 meters square, surrounded by precisely fitted stone walls featuring carved tenon heads depicting anthropomorphic feline deities. The construction quality rivals Tiwanaku, the famous empire that rose to prominence in this same region, but 5 centuries later. Here's where it gets tricky. Concohuacan was supposed to be a minor ceremonial center, one of several late formative sites that established the cultural and architectural foundations later perfected by Tiwanaku. But the architecture tells a different story. The stoneworking techniques at Conco, the precise fitting of irregular polygonal blocks, the sophisticated use of copper clamps to join massive stones, the underground drainage systems that still function after 2,000 years, match or exceed anything Tiwanaku produced. Some carved blocks at Conco show tool marks identical to those at Tiwanaku, suggesting either the same craftsmen worked both sites, or a shared technical tradition passed between generations. But radiocarbon dates don't lie. Conco's monumental construction phases predate Tiwanaku's rise by at least 3 centuries. This means one of two things, both problematic for standard narratives. Either Conco Huancain possessed sophisticated architectural knowledge that was somehow lost and later rediscovered by Tiwanaku, or Tiwanaku's origins lie much earlier than currently accepted, with Conco representing an early manifestation of the same culture. The skeletal evidence adds another layer of mystery. Excavations in the temple complex uncovered burial chambers containing 43 individuals, interred during different construction phases spanning roughly 4 centuries. Standard bioarchaeological analysis proceeded normally until researchers examined the cranial remains from 8 individuals in Chamber 7. These skulls displayed dramatic artificial deformation, with elongated posterior vaults creating a distinctive conehead appearance. Cranial modification was common across ancient Andean cultures, practiced for aesthetic and social status reasons. But the Chamber 7 skulls showed something unusual. The modifications were so extreme that several specimens exhibited increased cranial capacity, with endocranial volumes exceeding 1,600 cubic centimeters compared to the human average of 1,400. Whether this increased brain volume translated to different cognitive capabilities remains purely speculative. Brain size correlates poorly with intelligence across normal human ranges. But the modifications clearly mark these individuals as profoundly different, set apart from the population norm in ways that required years of careful binding during childhood. The ritual artifacts from these 8 burials suggest they occupied special status. Each interment included a carved wooden staff topped with a composite deity head featuring feline, serpent, and raptor elements, cosmological imagery that later became central to Tiwanaku religion. The staff heads contained cavities stuffed with organic materials, coca leaves, hallucinogenic San Pedro cactus fragments, powdered seashells from the Pacific coast 500 kilometers away, and unidentified botanical remains that spectrographic analysis hasn't conclusively identified but that might represent ayahuasca vine or related psychoactive compounds. These individuals weren't just elite nobility. They were religious specialists, shamanic intermediaries who used altered states of consciousness to communicate with divine forces, their physically modified skulls marking them as beings who existed between human and supernatural realms. Local Aymara communities preserve stories about the long-headed ones, ancestral spirits who descended from the sky during the age when the sun walked on earth and taught humanity the sacred knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and stonework. According to these traditions, the long-headed ones could communicate with stones, singing songs that made the rocks soft and pliable, allowing construction of temples impossible for ordinary humans. Before you dismiss this as pure mythology, consider the engineering mysteries at Conco Huancain. Some foundation stones weigh over 20 metric tons. They sit on ground that was carefully excavated, filled with layers of sand and clay to create stable footings, then topped with precisely leveled paving stones, all accomplished without wheeled transport, without draft animals. Llamas can carry perhaps 30 kilograms, and without metal tools harder than copper. The nearest quarry for the largest stones lies 7 kilometers distant, across terrain that includes steep ravines and loose scree slopes. Moving these megalithic blocks would challenge modern engineering firms with machinery and computers. How did a pre-industrial society manage it? Multiple theories compete for acceptance. Some archaeologists propose that the builders used wooden rollers and massive labor crews, perhaps mobilizing thousands of people during seasonal work parties timed to agricultural calendars. Others point to experimental archaeology demonstrating that stones can be moved on sleds over tracks made from wet clay, which reduces friction dramatically. Still others suggest sophisticated pulley systems using llama hide ropes, leveraging mechanical advantage to multiply human force. All of these explanations are plausible. None of them fully explain the precision of the final placement, the way irregularly shaped stones fit together with contact surfaces so tight that you cannot slide a knife blade between them. That level of accuracy requires not just raw force but extraordinary spatial visualization, geometric knowledge, and quality control maintained across years of construction by coordinating hundreds of workers. Where did this knowledge come from? How was it transmitted? The long-headed ones of mythology supposedly taught these skills. The archaeological evidence shows us that someone certainly possessed them. Stand on the Altiplano at sunset, cold wind cutting through your jacket, the vast plateau stretching to distant volcano peaks. You're looking at foundation stones that have held their positions for 22 centuries, fitted with precision we struggle to replicate. Beneath your feet, in carefully constructed chambers, rest the remains of 8 individuals whose skulls were deliberately reshaped, whose burials included shamanic tools for entering altered states, whose social roles remain tantalizingly unclear. Were they priests? Kings? Astronomer-engineers who designed the whole complex? The artifacts they left behind suggest sophisticated understanding of chemistry, botany, astronomy, and structural engineering. Their modified skulls link them to mythological narratives about divine teachers. We've catalogued every artifact, radiocarbon dated every construction phase, created 3D models of the entire site. We still don't know who these long-headed ones really were, where their knowledge originated, or why their sophisticated architectural traditions apparently disappeared for 3 centuries before re-emerging at Tiwanaku just a few dozen kilometers north. The North Sea gives up secrets reluctantly, cold gray waters concealing as much as they reveal. But in 2018, during routine dredging operations for a wind farm foundation approximately 38 kilometers off the coast of Norfolk, England, machinery brought up something that stopped the project for 6 months: a massive carved stone block, 2.3 meters long and weighing roughly 5 metric tons, covered with spiral petroglyphs and cup-entering marks characteristic of Neolithic Atlantic coastal art. The stone's surface showed no marine fouling, no barnacle growth. It had been buried beneath sediment, protected from the corroding action of seawater. Marine geologists immediately recognized the problem. This block sat on what had once been Doggerland, the vast plain that connected Britain to continental Europe before rising sea levels submerged it between 8,500 and 6,500 years ago. If the stone dated to the Neolithic period, roughly 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, it would have been carved and erected after Doggerland already lay beneath the waves. Someone built a megalithic monument on what is now seafloor. Subsequent surveys using side-scan sonar and remote-operated vehicles revealed the stone wasn't alone. Over the next 18 months, researchers mapped a complex of 47 megalithic stones arranged in a rough oval measuring approximately 80 meters across, with smaller stones creating radial lines extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. The arrangement bore striking similarities to Stonehenge, located about 300 kilometers southwest on dry land, and to the Ring of Brodger in Orkney. But those sites were built on land that remains above water. This North Sea monument sat beneath 32 meters of seawater, constructed at a location that all geological models indicated should have been submerged for thousands of years. Unless the geological models were wrong. Or unless someone built this monument much earlier than the Neolithic period, perhaps during the Mesolithic when Doggerland still supported hunter-gatherer populations before the final catastrophic floods drowned it forever. The radiocarbon dating results, when they finally came back, only deepened the confusion. Organic material trapped in sediment around the base of the central stone returned dates clustering around 5,900 BC, plus or minus 100 years. That's roughly 8,000 years ago, placing construction firmly in the Mesolithic period, among hunter-gatherer societies not typically associated with megalithic architecture. The conventional narrative holds that monument building required agricultural societies with surplus labor and hierarchical organization, features that appeared in Britain only with Neolithic farmers around 4000 BC. But here sat physical evidence of sophisticated architectural planning and execution 2,000 years earlier, accomplished by people living in what textbooks characterize as small mobile bands focused on hunting, fishing, and gathering. Either those textbooks badly underestimate Mesolithic cognitive and organizational capabilities, or something more complex happened during the drowning of Doggerland that archaeology hasn't yet reconstructed. The petroglyphs add another dimension to the mystery. The spiral and cup and ring designs are thought to represent astronomical observations, seasonal calendars, or cosmological mapping, though honest researchers admit we're largely guessing about their specific meanings. What's undeniable is their distribution. Nearly identical designs appear on megaliths from Ireland to Portugal, from Brittany to Scotland, suggesting a shared symbolic language or religious system spanning the entire Atlantic seaboard during the late Mesolithic and early Neolithic periods. But the Doggerland stones potentially predate all other known examples of this artistic tradition by 1,000 years. If the dates are correct, this sunken monument might represent the origin point, the UR site where these symbolic forms first emerged before spreading to coastal communities throughout Atlantic Europe. That would make Doggerland not just a geographic link between Britain and the continent, but a cultural heartland, a population center sophisticated enough to produce monumental architecture and symbolic systems that influence vast geographic regions. Now consider the mythology. Across Northern European cultures, from Celtic to Germanic to Baltic traditions, stories persist about sunken lands, drowned kingdoms, cities that disappeared beneath the waves when the gods grew angry or when cosmic battles shattered the earth. The Welsh tell of Cantor Argyllwyd, a fertile lowland protected by seawalls until a drunken prince allowed the gates to open, drowning hundreds of families in a single night. The Norse describe Jotunheimr being partially submerged during the war between the Aesir and Vanir, primordial conflicts that reshaped the world's geography. Breton traditions speak of the city of Ys, built below sea level through magical engineering, ultimately destroyed when the devil tricked a princess into unlocking the floodgates. Are these purely mythological narratives, or do they preserve folk memories of the actual drowning of Doggerland, traumatic events that killed thousands of people as rising waters swallowed their homeland across centuries of gradual inundation punctuated by catastrophic flood events? The sea level rise that drowned Doggerland wasn't uniform or gentle. Geological evidence indicates at least 3 massive tsunami events between 8,200 and 6,100 BC, caused by underwater landslides off the coast of Norway. The largest, the Storegga slide around 6,200 BC, generated waves potentially 25 meters high that crashed across Doggerland, scouring away settlements, killing untold numbers of people, and accelerating the inundation process. Survivors would have watched their world transform, the familiar landscape disappearing beneath encroaching waters, forcing retreat to ever-shrinking islands until finally they had to choose, flee to the western uplands that would become Britain, or migrate east to continental Europe. That kind of generational trauma, losing your homeland piece by piece over centuries, punctuated by catastrophic floods, would absolutely generate stories passed down through oral tradition, gradually transforming into myth as specific details blurred but the emotional core remained. The land was lost, the waters rose, the old world drowned. Picture those final generations on Doggerland, watching the sea claim more territory each decade, knowing their grandchildren would not know the hunting grounds and fishing camps that sustained their ancestors. They erected this stone circle, perhaps, as a monument to their world, a marker of their existence, a way to say, "We were here, we built this, we understood the cosmos and marked its patterns in stone." They carved spirals representing the cycle of seasons, cup marks mapping stars, rings symbolizing the sun and moon whose movements they tracked with accuracy we're still discovering. Then the waters came, and the monument sank, and 8,000 years passed before anyone saw it again. We've mapped the stones now, photographed the petroglyphs, debated their significance in countless conferences. We still don't know exactly who built them, what specific beliefs motivated their construction, or how many other monuments might lie buried beneath the North Sea sediments, still waiting for discovery. The Sahara swallows history, endless dunes erasing footprints as soon as they're made. But in 2013, a collaboration between Libyan and Italian archaeologists working in the Fezzan region of southwestern Libya stumbled across something that desert winds had briefly exposed after a particularly violent sandstorm: a stone platform, precisely leveled, measuring 43 by 37 meters, sitting isolated in what is now the most inhospitable desert on Earth. The platform's construction technique immediately signaled antiquity. Massive sandstone blocks fitted without mortar, the contact surfaces showing evidence of grinding rather than cutting, suggesting construction before the development of metal saws. Initial assumptions placed it somewhere in the Roman period, perhaps a military outpost or way station along trans-Saharan trade routes. Then the excavation team cleared the first 2 meters of accumulated sand and found the paintings. The platform's surface featured hundreds of faded images, rendered in mineral pigments derived from ochre, charcoal, and a brilliant white material that spectrographic analysis identified as ground gypsum. The artistic style matched other Saharan rock art from the Brown Head period, a designation archaeologists use for paintings dating between 9,500 and 7,000 years ago, during the African humid period when the Sahara supported grasslands, rivers, and substantial human populations. But these weren't typical round-head paintings of dancing figures and abstract designs. These depicted something far more structured, geometric patterns arranged in precise mathematical sequences, including what appeared to be representations of the Fibonacci spiral, logarithmic curves, and angular measurements written in a base 6 numerical system that wouldn't be invented by human mathematicians until Bronze Age Mesopotamia, 5,000 years later. Either these paintings represented coincidental aesthetic choices that happened to match mathematical constants, or Mesolithic Saharan populations possessed sophisticated geometric and numerical knowledge that vanished without trace when the humid period ended and desertification drove survivors to the Nile Valley and other refuge zones. Surrounding the platform, excavations uncovered 17 stone structures arranged in a carefully planned radial pattern, each structure oriented toward a specific azimuth that matched the rising positions of prominent stars in the southern sky as they would have appeared around 8,500 BC. This wasn't casual construction. Someone surveyed the site with precision, made calculations accounting for astronomical movements, and embedded that knowledge into permanent architecture intended to function as both monument and observatory. Inside the structures, researchers found grinding stones, hearth features, and fragmentary remains of botanical materials suggesting habitation by groups who process wild grains, pre-agricultural people beginning to experiment with seed collection and storage. The surprising part wasn't the grain processing, which fits standard models of the transition from hunting-gathering to agriculture. The surprising part was finding it in the middle of the Sahara at a date 2,000 years before farming supposedly began anywhere in Africa. Then there were the burials. Excavation of Structure 9 revealed beneath its floor a chamber containing 11 individuals, arranged in a seated position facing the central platform, hands positioned as if grasping objects that had long since decayed. The skeletal material indicated a population characterized by robust builds and tall stature, with average estimated heights around 178 centimeters for males, substantially larger than contemporary populations in Northeast Africa, who typically averaged 165 centimeters. Cranial morphology showed unusual features, thick orbital ridges, pronounced occipital regions, and dental patterns that didn't match any known African population from the Holocene epoch. Genetic analysis of surviving enamel proteins suggested these individuals belonged to a maternal lineage that diverged from other African populations sometime during the late Pleistocene, possibly representing a remnant population that maintained genetic isolation in the Saharan refuge zone, while other groups migrated out of Africa or intermixed with incoming populations. Local Tuareg traditions preserve stories about the Kelasuf, supernatural beings who inhabited the desert before humans, dwelling in magnificent cities supplied with water from underground rivers that flowed through stone channels. According to the myths, the Kelasuf possessed knowledge of the stars and could predict future events by reading patterns in sand. When the desert came, when the rains ceased and the green lands turned to dust, the Kelasuf taught humanity the secrets of finding water, navigating by stars, and surviving in hostile environments before vanishing into the earth, where they still dwell in caverns beneath the dunes. Anthropologists typically interpret the Kelasuf as spiritual beings, jinn-like entities representing the dangerous chaos of the desert. But the Fezan discoveries offer another reading, Perhaps the Kelasuf stories preserve memories of an actual predecessor population, people who thrived during the Green Sahara period, who built observatories and conducted mathematical investigations, and who disappeared when environmental catastrophe transformed their world. The catastrophe was real enough. Between 7000 and 5000 BC, the African humid period collapsed due to shifting atmospheric patterns that redirected monsoon systems. The process wasn't gradual. Paleoclimate data indicates several sharp drying events lasting only decades, during which annual rainfall dropped by 50 to 70%. Rivers dried up, lakes evaporated, grasslands died. The people who had built settlements across the Sahara faced an impossible choice: migrate to shrinking oases and river valleys that couldn't support existing population levels, or die. Most migrated, bringing their knowledge and traditions to the Nile Valley and sub-Saharan Africa. Some stayed too long, leaving only bones and ruins buried beneath advancing dunes. The Fezan platform people might represent that in-between group, communities who maintained their traditional sites as long as possible, who continued making astronomical observations and conducting rituals even as their world died around them. Imagine standing on that platform at night, surrounded by the vast darkness of the Sahara, stars blazing overhead with a clarity impossible in our light-polluted modern world. You're watching the same sky they watched 9,000 years ago, seeing the same constellations wheel through their eternal cycles. But where they saw grasslands stretching to distant horizons, herds of gazelle and wild cattle grazing, rivers flowing through fertile valleys, you see only sand. Everything they built, the knowledge systems encoded in geometric paintings, the astronomical observations marked in stone structures, the social organization required to construct 43-meter platforms, all of it buried, forgotten, erased by environmental forces beyond human control. We've uncovered one site. We've documented its mathematics, mapped its astronomy, analyzed its skeletal remains. We still don't know how many other sites lie hidden beneath the Sahara, or what other knowledge systems disappeared when the rains failed and the desert advanced. The Amazon rainforest is supposed to be pristine wilderness, a vast green ocean where human influence remains minimal outside scattered indigenous villages and recent deforestation scars. That comfortable narrative collapsed in 2018 when LiDAR surveys, laser mapping technology that penetrates forest canopy to reveal ground features, exposed something that forced archaeologists to fundamentally reconsider pre-Columbian Amazonian civilization. In the Llanos de Moxos region of northern Bolivia, the surveys revealed a geometric landscape, earthwork structures arranged in precise patterns spanning over 4,500 square kilometers of rainforest. The structures included rectangular and circular platforms connected by elevated causeways, water channels forming interlocking networks, and massive geometric earthworks that from ground level look like natural ridges but from above reveal unmistakable human design. This wasn't wilderness. This was engineered landscape, constructed between approximately 500 CE and 1400 CE by societies that transformed vast swaths of Amazonia into carefully managed agricultural and ceremonial complexes. The scale challenges everything. The earthworks involved moving an estimated 50 million cubic meters of soil, accomplished without draft animals, without wheeled vehicles, using only human labor coordinated across generations. The platform mounds, numbering over 11,000 in the surveyed region alone, range from small family compounds to massive ceremonial centers exceeding 3 hectares in extent and 5 meters in height. The causeways stretch for kilometers, raised above seasonal flood levels to maintain year-round communication between settlements. The water management systems demonstrate sophisticated hydrological engineering, with check dams, fish weirs, and artificial ponds designed to maximize aquatic resource production during the annual flood cycle. These weren't small villages scratching out subsistence in the jungle. This was urbanism on a scale comparable to contemporary medieval European societies, supporting population densities potentially reaching levels as high as modern rural areas. Among the most puzzling structures are the so-called geoglyphs, massive geometric shapes carved into the earth, typically square or circular enclosures with diameters ranging from 90 to 300 meters, surrounded by banks and ditches that still stand 2 to 3 meters high after 1,000 years of erosion. Excavations at the Jakosai geoglyph revealed construction dates around 1000 CE, with evidence of periodic reconstruction suggesting the site remained ritually significant for centuries. But here's the mystery: the geoglyphs show no signs of habitation. No trash middens, no structural remains, no evidence of daily domestic activity. The surrounding platforms and mounds contain all the normal archaeological markers of residential occupation: ceramic fragments, botanical remains, hearth features. The geoglyphs, despite their massive size and engineering complexity, appear to have been purely ceremonial spaces, possibly used only during specific seasonal gatherings or rituals. Why would societies invest enormous labor resources into constructing enclosures they didn't actually inhabit? The artifacts from these sites add further complications. Ceramic analysis reveals technological sophistication that rivals anything produced in the ancient Americas. Some vessels feature tempering materials, substances added to clay to improve workability and reduce cracking during firing, that include ground shell transported from the Atlantic coast over 1,500 kilometers distant, charcoal from specific tree species that don't grow locally, and in 11 cases from the Puerto Escondido site, particles of platinum, a metal that requires sophisticated processing to isolate, and that Europeans didn't master until the 18th century. The platinum-tempered ceramics date to approximately 800 CE. Someone in pre-Columbian Amazonia not only knew about platinum but could process it sufficiently to produce particles fine enough for ceramic tempering. That knowledge apparently vanished without spreading to neighboring societies or being mentioned in any European colonial account. Then there are the mysterious stone circles, features that shouldn't exist in a region without natural stone outcrops. At the Kotoka site, excavations uncovered 17 circular arrangements of carved stones, each stone weighing between 20 and 80 kilograms, brought from quarries at least 40 kilometers distant. The stones bear petroglyphs depicting anthropomorphic figures with radiating head appendages that some researchers interpret as headdresses, but others suggest might represent antennae or supernatural attributes. Charcoal from hearths associated with the stone circles dates to approximately 1200 CE. But here's where it gets tricky. Pollen analysis from sediment cores indicates the area around Kotoka was under dense forest cover during the 12th century, just as it is today. Moving 80 kilogram stones 40 kilometers through dense rainforest without roads, without pack animals, navigating rivers and swamps, represents a logistical feat we can describe but struggle to explain. Why go to such effort? What ceremonies or rituals justified that level of investment? Local indigenous groups, particularly Mojino and Boer communities who are descendants of the earthwork builders, preserve oral traditions about the grandfather cities, massive settlements inhabited by ancestors who possessed knowledge of plant medicines, astronomical cycles, and methods for making the earth dance. A phrase that might reference the massive earth-moving projects, or might describe agricultural techniques that dramatically increased soil fertility. These traditions also mention tall ancestors, forest giants, who stood above normal people and could see spirits invisible to ordinary eyes. Before dismissing this as mythological embellishment, consider the skeletal evidence from the Loma Mendoza burial mounds: 3 individuals with estimated living heights exceeding 195 centimeters, substantially taller than average pre-Columbian Amazonian populations. One skeleton, catalogued as LM7, stood approximately 203 centimeters tall, with robust bone structure and markers of exceptional muscular development. Were these the forest giants of legend, real people whose unusual size contributed to their social importance and eventual mythologization? Stand in the rainforest, surrounded by the constant hum of insects, the calls of howler monkeys echoing through the canopy, the air thick with humidity. Beneath your feet lies a platform mound, grass-covered, looking natural until excavation reveals the cut-and-fill construction, the carefully selected soils, the ceremonial deposits. Walk 100 meters and you're on a causeway, raised roadway built 1,000 years ago, still functional, still defining the landscape. Climb to the platform summit, and suddenly the scale becomes visible. Ridges extending to the horizon, geometric patterns carved into the earth, the remnants of a civilization that transformed wilderness into garden, that sustained populations in the tens of thousands for nearly a millennium. We've mapped the earthworks, analyzed the ceramics, debated the social organization required for such projects. We still don't know how they organized labor on this scale, what ideological systems motivated such investment, or what catastrophic events between 1400 and 1500 CE caused this entire civilization to collapse so completely that European explorers 300 years later described the Amazon as empty wilderness. The island of Sardinia rises from the Mediterranean Sea, mountainous and enigmatic, holding secrets that have baffled archaeologists since systematic research began in the 19th century. Scattered across the island's landscape stand over 7,000 nuraghi, stone towers constructed between 1900 and 730 BC during Sardinia's Bronze and Iron Ages. The towers range from simple single structures to elaborate complexes with multiple towers connected by curtain walls, like the famous Nurig su Nuraxi, which features a central tower surrounded by 4 corner towers within a defensive perimeter. The construction technique is megalithic, massive basalt blocks fitted without mortar, corbelled roofs creating interior chambers, and in the largest examples, towers reaching heights of 25 meters. That's impressive engineering for the Bronze Age. What makes it mysterious is that we have no idea what they were for. The standard interpretation holds that nuraghi served defensive functions, fortress towers where Bronze Age communities could retreat during conflicts. That explanation works for some sites but fails to account for others. Many nuraghi occupy locations with no defensive advantage, built in valleys rather than hilltops, positioned where they control no strategic routes or resources. Some are isolated, standing alone kilometers from any settlement. Others cluster in groups visible to each other, suggesting possible communication networks. Interior spaces are too small for housing significant populations. Few show evidence of siege or combat. The artifact assemblages from excavated nuraghi include pottery, bronze tools, and food remains, but rarely weapons in quantities you'd expect from military installations. Something else was happening here, some function we haven't correctly identified because we're asking the wrong questions. Alternative theories propose ritual or astronomical purposes. Several nuraghi exhibit precise alignments. Nurig Gena Maria at Villanova Foro aligns to the winter solstice sunrise, while Nurig Baramini tracks the equinox sunset. The complex at Turalba includes sightlines between towers that mark the rising positions of significant stars. These alignments suggest at least some nuraghi functioned as observatories or ceremonial centers where astronomical events received ritual attention. But that doesn't explain the truly isolated structures or the variation in design complexity. Why build 7,000 towers across 8,000 square kilometers if they're primarily ritual sites? The labor investment was enormous. Nurig su Nuraxi required moving and placing approximately 200,000 metric tons of stone. Bronze Age Sardinia couldn't have sustained 7,000 projects on that scale unless they served some essential function that made the investment worthwhile. Then there's the matter of the builder's identity and origins. DNA analysis of Bronze Age skeletal material from Nurig contexts reveals population genetic profiles showing minimal continuity with modern Sardinians. The Bronze Age population carried Y chromosome lineages and mitochondrial haplogroups more closely related to Iberian and North African populations than to later Iron Age and Roman period Sardinians. This suggests substantial population turnover, either through migration or replacement, sometime around 730 BC when Nurig construction abruptly ceased. What happened to the Nurig builders? Where did they go? Some researchers propose that the Sea Peoples crisis, which devastated Eastern Mediterranean civilizations around 1200 BC, also impacted Sardinia, though the archaeological evidence for direct connection remains ambiguous. Others suggest that Phoenician colonization beginning around 900 BC gradually displaced or absorbed the indigenous population, transforming Sardinian society in ways that made Nurig construction obsolete or ideologically inappropriate. Local Sardinian folklore preserves stories about the gigantes, supernatural beings who built the nuraghi in ages past, lifting stones that hundreds of men couldn't move, constructing the towers in single nights through magic or divine power. These giants appear across Sardinian mythology, sometimes as benevolent ancestors who taught humans agriculture and metallurgy, sometimes as antagonists defeated by heroes or saints. Archaeological evidence from several Nurag sites includes skeletal remains of individuals with estimated heights between 185 and 198 centimeters, notably taller than typical Bronze Age Mediterranean populations, which averaged 165 to 170 centimeters for males. The gigantes of legend might represent real people whose unusual stature contributed to social prominence and eventual mythologization. Or the myths might be explanatory stories, ideological narratives created to explain impressive megalithic structures by attributing them to superhuman builders. The most elaborate Nurag complexes include features that don't fit any functional explanation. At Nurag Arubiu, excavations revealed beneath the main tower a chamber containing a circular arrangement of 17 upright stones, each carved with spiral motifs identical to Neolithic megalithic art from Malta and Ireland. The stones predate the Nurag by at least 1,000 years, meaning the Bronze Age builders excavated Neolithic structures and incorporated them into their towers. Why? Were they claiming continuity with earlier inhabitants, legitimizing their presence by connecting to ancient sacred sites? Or did they recognize the stones' astronomical or ritual significance and deliberately preserve them? The same pattern appears at 4 other major Nurag sites. Bronze Age towers constructed over Neolithic ceremonial deposits, as if deliberately establishing connection with the deep past. Imagine the Mediterranean Bronze Age, a world of trading networks connecting Iberia to Anatolia, Egyptian grain ships passing Phoenician merchants, Mycenaean warriors raiding coastal settlements. On Sardinia, communities build their towers, marking the landscape with stone monuments visible from kilometers away. Inside these towers, people gather for purposes we can only guess: religious ceremonies timed to solstices, meetings between clan leaders, storage of sacred objects, astronomical observations used to plan agricultural cycles. The builders know they're continuing something ancient, something that began when their Neolithic predecessors carved spirals into standing stones. Then the world changes. Sea peoples disrupt trade routes, Bronze Age kingdoms collapse, Phoenicians arrive with new technologies and ideologies. The Nuragi fall silent. Grass grows between the stones. Centuries pass. We climb these towers now, photograph the corbelled roofs, measure the alignments, debate their functions in academic journals. We still don't know who really built them, what specific beliefs and practices motivated their construction, or why 7,000 towers were simultaneously abandoned, leaving Sardinia's landscape littered with Bronze Age mysteries. The highland valleys of Peru contain countless Inca ruins, stone cities perched on impossible ridges, agricultural terraces climbing mountainsides like massive stairs. But in 2007, researchers working in the Chachapoyas region of northern Peru, an area famous for cliffside mausoleums and cloud forest settlements, stumbled across something that predated the Inca by centuries and challenged assumptions about pre-Columbian building techniques. High on a vertical cliff face, accessible only by rope, they found the entrance to a structure that initial inspection suggested might be a tomb or storage facility. What they discovered instead was a complex of chambers extending 40 meters into the solid rock, with rooms connected by narrow passages, vertical shafts, and architectural features including corbelled ceilings and precisely carved niches. The entire complex had been excavated from living rock using tools that left distinctive cutting marks, parallel grooves spaced exactly 3 millimeters apart, consistent across hundreds of square meters of worked surface. The precision was unsettling. Modern stone-cutting machinery produces similar groove patterns when using diamond wire saws or automated cutting heads. Bronze Age and pre-Columbian copper alloy tools don't. They leave irregular marks, varying depths, evidence of repeated striking and prying. The Chachapoyas chambers showed none of those characteristics. The grooves were perfectly parallel, perfectly spaced, perfectly uniform. Either the builders possessed cutting technology substantially more advanced than anything known from pre-Columbian Peru, or they exercised quality control and craftsmanship so rigorous that over thousands of cutting strokes, they maintained 3 mm spacing with less than 0.2 mm deviation. Both possibilities seem equally implausible, yet the physical evidence admits no other interpretation. Someone, somehow, cut these chambers from solid volcanic tuff with a level of precision that professional stonemasons describe as mechanically perfect. Inside the chambers, excavation uncovered artifacts that further complicated chronology. Ceramic fragments showed stylistic elements associated with the Chachapoyas culture, which flourished between 750 and 1475 CE. But beneath those layers, in what stratigraphy indicated was the original construction fill, researchers found older ceramics showing affinities with pre-ceramic traditions dating to before 1800 BC, styles that shouldn't appear in this region for another 1,000 years according to conventional cultural sequences. Radiocarbon dates from organic material in the fill range wildly, clustering in three distinct groups: 1750 BC, 920 CE, and 1380 CE. Either the chambers were constructed very early and repeatedly reused across millennia, or the stratigraphy is disturbed in ways that geological analysis hasn't detected, or the chambers have a more complex history involving multiple construction and modification phases. The human remains found in Chamber 7 added another data point that didn't fit existing narratives. The bones belonged to a single individual, interred in a seated position facing the chamber entrance, surrounded by textile fragments too degraded for detailed analysis but showing traces of complex weaving patterns. The skeleton's cranium displayed extensive artificial modification, creating an elongated shape similar to examples from coastal Peru and the Altiplano, but regional Chachapoyas populations don't typically practice cranial modification. The individual stood approximately 193 centimeters tall, far exceeding average heights for the region and period. Dental analysis revealed a diet rich in maize and marine protein, peculiar for someone buried in a highland location 300 kilometers from the Pacific coast. Isotopic analysis of tooth enamel suggested childhood spent in a coastal environment, followed by migration inland during adolescence. This wasn't a local person. This was an immigrant from the coast, someone whose modified skull and exceptional height marked them as socially important, interred in a chamber cut with impossible precision, accompanied by ceramics spanning 3,000 years of cultural development. Local oral traditions among communities descended from Chachapoyas peoples described the Sacapuelas, cloud forest spirits who dwelt in cliffside caves before humans arrived, teaching the arts of weaving and architecture to ancestors who honored them through offerings and ceremonies. The Sacapuelas appear in stories as tall, pale-skinned beings with elongated heads, able to walk through solid rock and command stones to move. Spanish colonial accounts from the 16th century mention Chachapoyas people showing conquistadors ancient cliff structures that the natives claimed they did not build, attributing them instead to supernatural predecessors. Francisco de Orellana's 1542 expedition journals include a passage describing sepulchres high upon the cliffs, worked with such art that neither iron nor fire could have carved them, which the Indians say were made by giants in the time before the sun. The modern archaeological evidence of impossible precision, of modified skulls and unusual heights, of temporal discontinuities spanning millennia, all of it resonates with these mythological frameworks in uncomfortable ways. The geological context adds yet another complication. The volcanic tuff in which the chambers are carved formed during an eruption event approximately 2.3 million years ago. It's relatively soft when first exposed to air but hardens substantially over time as mineral content consolidates through chemical weathering. The deeper you cut into fresh tuff, the softer it remains, as unexposed material hasn't undergone surface hardening. The Chachapoyas chambers penetrate 40 meters into the cliff face, meaning the deepest sections were carved through relatively soft stone. But the precision appears consistent from the entrance to the deepest chambers, suggesting the entire complex was excavated in a single sustained effort before surface hardening could affect cutting difficulty. That implies a construction timeline measured in years rather than decades or centuries, extraordinarily rapid for a project involving removal of hundreds of cubic meters of stone from a vertical cliff face accessible only by rope. Stand at the entrance to these chambers, wind whipping across the cliff face, cloud forests stretching into valley depths below. You're looking at cutting marks that shouldn't exist, chambers that confuse every chronology, burials that connect coastal and highland traditions in ways we haven't documented elsewhere. Someone with extraordinary technical skill and organizational capability created this complex, investing enormous effort to excavate secret spaces accessible only to those willing to risk deadly falls. For what purpose? Tombs seem too simple an answer. Why such precision for the dead? Ritual chambers, perhaps, spaces for ceremonies requiring isolation and secrecy. Storage facilities for sacred objects, or knowledge too dangerous for common access. We've documented every groove, photographed every surface, radiocarbon dated every scrap of organic material. We still don't know who really built these chambers, what tools they used, or why they invested such incredible precision in a project that remained hidden from casual observation, visited only by those who knew exactly where to look and how to reach it. We've traveled together across continents and millennia, standing in tombs beneath Jordanian cliffs, walking Mekong riverbanks where Bronze Age metalworkers somehow discovered iron technology 1,000 years too early, shivering on the Bolivian Altiplano where shamans with elongated skulls supervised construction of temples that predate the empires we thought invented them. We've explored drowned monuments beneath the North Sea, geometric earthworks carved into the Green Sahara when mathematics supposedly didn't exist yet, Amazonian cities erased by forests but revealed again through laser mapping, thousands of megalithic towers scattered across Sardinia for purposes we can't definitively explain, and cliff chambers cut with precision that seems mechanically impossible using pre-Columbian technology. 8 mysteries, 8 sites where the physical evidence refuses to align with our comfortable narratives about human development, cultural diffusion, and technological capability. What connects these disparate places? Not a single lost civilization or ancient astronaut intervention. Those explanations are too simple, too dismissive of the complex realities that archaeology actually reveals. What connects them is something more profound and more humbling, the recognition that our ancestors were capable of far more than we typically credit them with, that supposedly primitive societies possessed knowledge systems and organizational abilities we're still struggling to reconstruct, and that the story of human civilization is vastly more complicated than the linear progression from simple to complex that popular narratives suggest. The Nabateans maintained trade networks spanning continents. Mesolithic Doggerland communities built megalithic observatories. Late formative Andean cultures possessed architectural sophistication that rivals their more famous successors. Saharan populations during the African humid period conducted mathematical investigations that contemporary academic culture assumes required Bronze Age urbanization. Pre-Columbian Amazonians engineered landscapes on scales comparable to medieval Europe. Bronze Age Sardinians coordinated labor projects involving millions of tons of stone. Chachapoyas or their predecessors cut rock with precision we struggle to explain. In every case, we encounter the same pattern. Initial confident assumptions based on existing models, followed by discoveries that don't fit, followed by decades of debate and revised theories that still leave crucial questions unanswered. The scientific method works, slowly grinding toward better understanding through accumulation of evidence and refinement of hypotheses. But the grinding is slow, and the evidence remains stubbornly ambiguous at exactly the points where we most want clarity. We can radiocarbon date organic materials with impressive accuracy, but dates alone don't explain motivations or reconstruct vanished knowledge systems. We can analyze DNA from ancient skeletons, revealing population movements and genetic relationships, but genetic data doesn't tell us what people believed or why they invested enormous resources in projects whose purposes we can only guess. We can map sites with laser precision, model ancient climates with sophisticated computer simulations, recreate diets through isotopic analysis, and still find ourselves staring at 17 basalt sarcophagi or perfectly parallel cutting grooves or platinum-tempered ceramics, unable to fully explain what we're seeing. The mythological elements that keep appearing, giants, sky people, lost races, supernatural builders, deserve thoughtful consideration, not dismissal. These stories preserve something, even if not literal history. They encode cultural memory of real people who stood out from population norms, whose unusual physical characteristics or exceptional abilities mark them as different, and therefore memorable across generations of oral transmission. They preserve memories of environmental catastrophes like the drowning of Doggerland or the desertification of the Sahara, traumatic events that killed thousands and forced massive population movements. They preserved technical knowledge in metaphorical form, the long-headed ones who could make stones soft. Might represent master builders with sophisticated understanding of leverage, friction, and structural engineering. The Kelasuf who read patterns in sand might represent astronomer priests who used celestial observations for practical navigation and calendrical purposes. When we find skeletal remains of individuals who actually were substantially taller than their contemporaries, when we find astronomical alignments encoded in megalithic architecture, when we find evidence of sophisticated technical knowledge in supposedly primitive contexts, the myths and the physical evidence begin to resonate with each other in ways that demand careful attention. But let's be honest about what we don't know, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the limits of our understanding. We don't know who built the Doggerland stone circle or what specific beliefs motivated its construction. We don't know how Mekong Valley communities acquired iron smelting technology, or why that knowledge didn't spread to neighbors. We don't know how Conco Wankane builders moved 20-ton stones across 7 kilometers of difficult terrain. We don't know why Fezan platform builders encoded mathematical constants in rock art, or where they went when the rains failed. We don't know what functions the Amazonian geoglyphs served or how societies processed platinum without modern metallurgy. We don't know what purpose motivated construction of 7,000 Sardinian towers. We don't know what tools cut the Chachapoyas chambers with mechanical precision. These gaps in knowledge aren't failures. They're the growing edges where research continues, where new discoveries might tomorrow transform our understanding just as LiDAR revealed the Amazon's geometric landscape or storm-driven erosion exposed the Libyan platform. What we do know is that the past was stranger and more sophisticated than 20th century models acknowledged. For too long, archaeology operated under assumption frameworks that treated cultural development as a ladder climbed one rung at a time, with each technological innovation requiring previous foundations. Hunter-gatherers don't build monuments. Pre-agricultural societies don't conduct astronomy. Bronze Age people can't achieve mechanical precision. These assumptions kept crumbling as new evidence accumulated. Now we recognize that human ingenuity, problem-solving ability, and capacity for sophisticated abstract thought emerged very early in our species' history. What varied across cultures wasn't fundamental cognitive capability but specific knowledge systems, technical traditions, and social organizations that enabled different societies to achieve different things. Some built monumental architecture while remaining mobile hunter-gatherers. Others developed mathematics without writing. Still others achieved metallurgical sophistication in isolation, without the gradual developmental sequence textbooks describe. The diversity of human achievement defies simple categorization or linear progression. The emotional resonance of these mysteries connects to something fundamental in human nature, our desire to understand where we came from, to connect with ancestors across impossible temporal distances, to recover knowledge that once existed but was lost. When you stand in Petra's hidden tomb, surrounded by inscriptions nobody can read, you're experiencing a direct relationship with mystery, not manufactured entertainment, but genuine unknowing, the intellectual and emotional space where curiosity lives and thrives. That same feeling emerges in every one of these sites. They're places where the past refused to completely disappear, where enough remained to tantalize us with possibilities while withholding final answers. They're gifts from our ancestors, puzzles they left for us to solve, evidence that their lives and achievements deserve recognition even when we can't fully reconstruct the details. This matters beyond academic archaeology. These mysteries remind us that human history is still being written, still being discovered, still surprising us with capabilities and connections we didn't anticipate. Every revelation about what ancient societies accomplished expands our sense of what's humanly possible. If Mesolithic communities could build megalithic observatories, if pre-Columbian societies could engineer landscapes on continental scales, if Bronze Age peoples could achieve precision that impresses modern craftspeople, then perhaps our own limitations are more assumed than real. Perhaps we've underestimated our own species, projecting recent European cultural assumptions backward onto ancestors who actually operated under different frameworks with different possibilities. The mysteries invite us to think bigger, question harder, remain open to evidence even when it challenges comfortable narratives. So, what should you do with all this? First, maintain healthy skepticism about both orthodox narratives and alternative theories. Mainstream archaeology gets many things right but sometimes moves slowly to incorporate anomalous evidence. Alternative theories often identify genuine problems with orthodox models, but then leap to unsupported conclusions. The truth usually lies in careful evaluation of physical evidence, peer-reviewed research, and multiple competing hypotheses tested against data. Second, pay attention to new discoveries. Archaeology is a rapidly evolving field. Technologies like LiDAR, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic studies, and ground-penetrating radar constantly reveal new information. What seems mysterious today might have clear explanations in 5 years, or might become even more mysterious as additional data complicates rather than clarifies. Third, visit these places if you can. Standing in physical spaces where ancient people lived, worked, built, and died creates connections that photographs and documentary narration can't replicate. Even if you can't reach remote sites, local museums and regional archaeological parks offer opportunities to encounter the material culture of past societies directly. And finally, keep asking questions. Keep digging, literally if you pursue archaeology professionally, metaphorically if you engage with the past through reading, documentaries, museum visits, and conversations. The 17 individuals in Petra's hidden tomb, the iron-smelting Bronze Age people on the Mekong, the shamans with elongated skulls on the Altiplano, the Mesolithic monument builders of Doggerland, the geometric mathematicians of the Green Sahara, the landscape engineers of the Amazon, the tower-building communities of Bronze Age Sardinia, the precision rock cutters of the Chachapoyas Highlands. All of them lived full lives, experienced joys and sorrows, passed knowledge to their children, faced problems and solved them with the resources available. They were human like us, possessed of the same fundamental cognitive capabilities, emotional ranges, and creative potential. They built things that still stand, created art that still moves us, asked questions about cosmos and existence that we still ponder. Their mysteries are our inheritance, invitations to engage with deep time and recognize our place in a story that stretches back thousands of generations and forward to futures we can't predict. Some secrets still lie just beneath your feet, waiting for curiosity and careful excavation to bring them back into light. Keep digging.